The Honda CR-V has always been the benchmark in the crossover category, and that means it's always been the one to beat. And it has beat almost everything we've put it up against, and that includes the Toyota RAV4, the Mazda CX-5, the Subaru Forester, and the Ford Escape. So the fact that it has beat all of those really good crossovers is very impressive. Now, the Hyundai Tucson has always been one of my personal favorites in this category, and I think it's a really solid competitor, but we're about to see if it's good enough to beat our benchmark CR-V. Hyundai has been pumping out really solid cars lately, and that's because they're always benchmarking Honda. But does it go above and beyond what Honda's offering? The Tucson and the CR-V seem pretty equally matched at first, but if we look a little deeper, the story is a little bit different. First off, I know style is totally a personal preference, but there's too much going on in the CR-V's design to make it really attractive. I mean, it looks okay, but it looks like they're trying too hard, and I don't think it'll age that well. The Tucson has cleaner lines and is a bit more traditional without being boring, and I just prefer the way it looks over the Honda. I also like the way the Tucson drives more than the CR-V, so I feel like it's a nice middle ground between the CR-V's softer, squishier ride and the Ford Escape's harsher, sportier ride. So it goes over a rough pavement really smoothly, and it's comfortable and predictable. And in general, it just feels a lot more buttoned down and a little bit more composed than the CR-V. The only real issue is with the 7-speed dual clutch transmission, because it's a little wonky sometimes, especially at low speeds, like when you're crawling forward in traffic, it judders a little bit and sometimes has trouble picking the right gear. But then the CR-V has the CVT, and it's whiny and unresponsive and it's noisy. So I'm much more willing to forgive the Tucson's transmission just because it's a lot easier to live with. This Tucson's powered by a 1.6-liter turbo 4-cylinder, which is the better choice over the naturally aspirated 2-liter base engine. With 175 horsepower and 195 pound-feet of torque, it has more torque but less horsepower than the CR-V. The torque difference is pretty obvious because the Hyundai seems to accelerate a touch faster off the line and also when passing on the highway. The CR-V, on the other hand, has a 1.5-liter turbo with 190 horsepower and 179 pound-feet of torque. In terms of driving dynamics, they're both pretty similar. I mean, there's no big surprises. They're both predictable, not overly exciting, and very easy to drive and maneuver, which is what really matters. Acceleration for both aren't going to blow you away. They're totally acceptable, unless you're in the CR-V's eco mode, and oh my god, it is awful. It was activated and I didn't know it, and the responsiveness was so slow that I thought the car was broken. But my mileage was the bomb, so at least we know it works. And if it's fuel economy that's really important to you, definitely go for the CR-V. It's a lot more fuel efficient than the Tucson in the city, on the highway, and as tested. The Tucson is rated to get 24 mpg in the city, 28 on the highway, and 25 combined. During our testing, we were hovering around 21 mpg, but we were driving it pretty aggressively and almost exclusively in the city. The CR-V, meanwhile, is rated at 27 mpg in the city, 33 highway, and 29 combined. We got between 26 and 30 mpg in real-world testing, and all of those numbers beat what the Hyundai gets. It's also a little lighter, which helps. So although the Tucson has worse fuel economy, its infotainment system is much better than the CR-V's. It's way more user-friendly, it's easier to navigate, it's faster and more responsive. And that doesn't mean Honda's system is awful either. There are just little things here and there that make Hyundai's a little bit better. We're in the Honda CR-V now, and one of the very first things you notice when you get in is that they did a much better job with interior design. What they have here is just a lot more modern and more clean than what the Hyundai has. Honda's interior has a bit more design flourish with the silver accents and this faux wood grain trim. The dashboard has a clean, simple design with not a lot of buttons. I also like that the gauge cluster is almost fully digital, where the Hyundai's is mostly analog. The Tucson's interior is perfectly functional, but it's just not as interesting to look at, and even though it has more buttons, it still doesn't look too busy, which is nice. I do prefer the Tucson's shifter because it's higher quality, and the CR-V's just feels clunky to use and doesn't feel very natural. I like that the CR-V has more useful storage cubbies and an electronic parking brake rather than the floor pedal operated one on the Tucson. Again, there's nothing inherently wrong with either cabin, and both are really user-friendly. The Honda has slightly less headroom in the front and back, but more legroom in the back than the Tucson. Chances are, if you're in the market for a compact crossover, you care way less about driving dynamics than cargo capacity. And the Honda CR-V definitely has way more room for cargo than the Tucson does. With all the seats up, the CR-V gets 39.2 cubic feet of space. Putting the rear seat flat opens up 75.8 cubic feet. Moving over to the Tucson, it has 31 cubic feet and 61.9 with the seats down, which is a bit of a disadvantage. The two crossovers are pretty different in terms of what kind of features they have. I'm okay to let that slide because I barely use adaptive cruise control. The CR-V just doesn't feel natural enough, and the lane keep assist is usually too aggressive with the steering corrections and the incessant beeping, so I don't use it either. The Tucson, meanwhile, gets ventilated seats, a better backup camera, rear parking sensors, adaptive headlights, a locking differential, and hill descent control. These are all things that the CR-V doesn't have, so I'd argue that it is better equipped. Both cars come with cross-traffic alert, automatic emergency braking, front collision alert. I actually like Hyundai's better because it's a bit less aggressive than the CR-V's. Blind spot monitoring, heated rear seats, and hands-free tailgates. The fact that the Tucson is better equipped is really interesting because the starting and as-tested price undercut the CR-V by a few $100s. And that's not a huge difference, but getting more stuff for less money definitely seems like a deal to me. To sum it up, we love that the Tucson drives better, has more equipment for less money, a better infotainment system, and is just better looking. We think that the wonky dual-clutch transmission could be smoothed out, and it's not as fuel efficient and doesn't have as much cargo capacity as the Honda. The CR-V, on the other hand, seems much more practical with a bigger cargo area. It's more fuel efficient, it has a stylish interior, and is a sales leader for a really good reason. The downsides are that it's slightly more expensive, the CVT is whiny and slow, and the exterior style is pretty polarizing. This was a really difficult comparison to pick a winner for, just because both crossovers are so good at doing their jobs. And I know the Honda has won every single comparison we put it in, but the Tucson is just so good that if it were my money on the line, I'd probably pick the Hyundai, but it wins by a very small margin. Just in general, it feels like an all-around better car. It's easier to live with and it has far better driving dynamics. Add in the fact that you get more features for less money, and even though it's a little bit older than the CR-V, you really can't go wrong.